So guys, like I told last week, I'm gonna start a series of videos about the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's a subject that I love. I research and I study for a long time. Actually, I did one about martial arts, not a series of video, but I did a documentary in Brazil here for the Combat channel that is in the UFC docs .com.br. If you want to check, it's just in Portuguese, unfortunately, but it's for free. The name is Arqueologia da Luta, is archaeology of the fight, and it's very interesting. We travel to Egypt, to Greece, to Brazil, to try to find out when the human being systematize and start to use the fighting as not just a tool for wars, but also for enjoyment and for sports and for religions and for rituals, this kind of thing. So it's very interesting. Anyways, when I start to think about talking the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was thinking about starting already in Brazil with Carlos Gracie, learning from Concoma and the history that everybody knows. But I was, researching that there was a very interesting history before that in Japan that people don't talk too much, and it's crucial to understand which jiu-jitsu came to here and how the development of jiu-jitsu influenced in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And it starts back then in Japan. So this first chapter, I want to talk about the jiu-jitsu and the development of jiu-jitsu in Japan before comes to Brazil. So I pretty much, I wrote down here some points that I'm gonna put in you can watch here. I'm gonna let this down here written. And the first thing I wanna talk is the history of Japan is divided. We can divide the history in periods, in periods of the history. So the first one is the old Japan before 1710. That there is many periods there, but I don't want to talk too much about that because what will be interesting for us is after that. So after that, there's the Nara and Heian period, which is the 710, starts in 710. Then the Kamakura period that's starting in 1192. Then there's the Muromachi period in 1338. Then Azuchi-Momoyama period in 1573. Edo, that is very important for us, is 1603. Then the Meiji, which is also very important for us, that's starting 1868. And then after that, there's the Taisho and Showa and after war periods that is not so important for us as the Jiu-Jitsu already arrived in Brazil. So in the Heian period in 710, the powerful families in Japan start to hire the warriors that they would call bushi to defend and to form like a private guard for themselves. And the government was pretty weak in that time, and those families, the powerful families, they start to take over the power. And the bush, they start to be called samurais, and they are hired for these powerful clans. And in the Kamakura, the next period, in Kamakura period in 1192, finally these bush, these warrior families, they arrive on power. And that's important, this period, because then is when the samurais, they start to take over Japan, and they will be in power for the next 700 years. They call the man military chef the Shogun, and the Shogun is the one that take all the power. So another very important part of the history of Japan is the period between 1467 and 1615, that we have a period of very intense war, civil wars, and this period is known as Sengoku, which is like the period of the stating war period or something like that. So in this period, for the first time, they start to have the schools of martial arts that they call Koryu bu-jutsu. Of course, they had martial arts before and techniques, everything, but in this period is when they start to really have these schools and it's more organized way to teach the art of the martial arts of wars. And those Koryu bujutsu, they of course they're more focused on weapons than in combat without weapons. They had some combat without weapons, like a kind of old jiu-jitsu, but it's not the focus, of course, because they would use swords and spears and even fire guns. So that was the focus because this is pretty much a training for the wars. So these schools, the bujutsu schools, the Koryu bujutsu schools, they are the schools that the samurai were training. And in this part of Japan, in the Sengoku period, the samurai really became a very important class in Japan, important figure in Japan, because they not just they are in power, but also there's many wars and civil wars, so they become very important. So finally, in 1603, the Tokugawa Ieyasu become a shogun, and he started to unify. He finally unified all Japan, and it starts before with Oda Nobunaga, another shogun, but he's the one who finally get all Japan unified, and this he starts a period of peace that will last for all the Edo period. The Edo period is when Tokugawa take over the power, and his family will be in power from 1603 till 1867. And what they do to keep this peace, the first thing they do is to close the Japanese harbor to the west, to keep everything closed and to keep a very hard control on the population. And the other thing they do, they forbidding everybody who was not a samurai to use a katana or any kind of weapon. And it's a very important thing for jiu-jitsu, because then many schools, they start to put their focus not anymore in the use of weapons, but in the use of unarmed combat, or combat without weapons, because most people couldn't use weapons. So they start to create these schools that they call Koryu Jujutsu. So instead of the bujutsu, that the focus was in armed combat with weapons, the Koryu Jujutsu, the focus is on combat without weapons. And of course they had some weapons, defense and attacking with some weapons that they used in the day-by-day life. But the primary focus was in fighting and teaching combat without weapons. And that's where jiu-jitsu schools, this Koryu Jiu-Jitsu, they develop very much in many styles. They say even more than 100, sometimes some people say more than 200 styles of Jiu-Jitsu grow in Japan in these times. And they became very popular. And in 1867, we start the Meiji period, when there is a crisis on the government of the shogun, and they finally there is a pressure from outside and from inside Japan, and they finally were able to make the government come back to the emperor, and the shogun era stops and ends at this time. And the family, the Ieyasu family, they lost their power, and they take the power back to the emperor and the king. And then there's the opening to the West and westernization of the Japanese culture at the first years of the Meiji period, that they see the old Japanese culture as something that is outdated, and they kind of put aside the traditional culture. And jujutsu, is one of those things that they start to don't pay attention too much anymore, and they start to have looking for the future and looking for the westernization of Japan. And for the first year, and of course, one thing that is very important, the samurai was forbidden, so there was no more samurai, and is extinct the class of the samurais. So in the first years of the Meiji period, there was a very drop on the jiu-jitsu, traditional jiu-jitsu schools, the Koryu jiu-jitsu schools, and they start to be seen as an old thing, and with no more reason to exist. At the same time, many jiu-jitsu professionals, because of that, they start to looking for different jobs, and also some of the masters, the traditional masters, they start to challenge other schools, and many challenges between schools start to happen, which will even get worse the image of jiu-jitsu to the society, because many of these challenges are very bloody challenges and people would even die sometimes. So the jiu-jitsu is a really low point in these first years of the Meiji area. But then, one figure that I'm gonna talk soon, born, that his name is Jigoro Kano. He born in 1860, and he started to train Koryu Jiu-Jitsu to defend himself against bullying and these kind of things. At 16 years old, he became expert in two styles of Jiu-Jitsu, Teijin Shinyo Ryu and Kito Ryu. And he's the guy who lately will found the Kodokan Judo, another style of Jiu-Jitsu. In this time also, the late 1800s, with the masters, they start to create and to build other schools that they would call Gendai Budo schools, that they are different than the traditional Koryu Jiu-Jitsu. The Koryu Jiu-Jitsu are the old martial arts schools, and the Gendai Budo schools are the modern ones, like the Judo ones that we're gonna talk in the next video. So the next video I'm gonna start talking about Jigoro Kano and his lives and why he's so important to the development of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But in this one, I just gonna give an intro about the history before, how the Jiu-Jitsu was developed and how it all started. Jiu-Jitsu start to be developed when the fight without weapons start to be developed in Japan. And before I finish here, I just want to say that I bought this book here. It's a very good book, a very good research. It's in Portuguese. I don't think they have in English yet, but I hope soon they will have. They talk about the creation of MMA and Vale Tudo in Brazil, why Brazil, many countries they had this same kind of competitions with no rules, but why Brazil was the one who kept these competitions and the history behind that. So it's very interesting. It's one of the books that I'm researching, and I also showed some books that I was researching in the previous video. So this is the number one video that I'm talking about the history. Sorry about my English, sometimes it's hard to say all this history in English, but I see you next time, and we're gonna start to talk about the modernization of Jiu-Jitsu and the Kodokan Judo and how it's important to the formation of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, okay? So thank you very much, guys, and see you in the next video.